The city seemed alive and restless in the storm. Rain fell relentlessly, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against the rooftops and streets. It cascaded in sheets, blurring the once familiar outlines of buildings and street signs into shapeless shadows. The air was thick with the metallic tang of rain-soaked concrete, mingling with the faint scent of wet earth and exhaust fumes. In the distance, the occasional rumble of thunder reverberated through the dark sky, a reminder of nature's unyielding power. Aiden trudged through the downpour, his head bowed low and his hoodie pulled tightly over his head. Each drop of rain stung his face, icy and unyielding. He had always felt a strange kinship with the rain, finding its unrelenting nature both soothing and inspiring. But tonight, the weather mirrored something heavier inside him, a nameless anxiety that gnawed at his thoughts. The storm wasn't just outside. It seemed to rage within him too. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional car that sped by, its tires slicing through puddles and leaving trails of rippling water in its wake. Most people had retreated indoors, seeking shelter from the storm. Only the faint glow of flickering neon signs illuminated the gloom, their distorted reflections dancing in the puddles that pooled along the sidewalks. As Aiden rounded a corner, the hem of his jeans clinging stubbornly to his legs, a sound cut through the monotony of the rain, a faint, desperate whimper. He froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was so fragile, so barely there, that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again, softer this time, almost drowned out by the hammering rain. Aiden's eyes scanned the street, his pulse quickening. The buildings around him were old and weathered, their facades marked by decades of neglect. Overflowing trash bins lined the sidewalk, their contents spilling onto the wet pavement. Soggy cardboard boxes and crumpled newspapers littered the ground, dissolving into mush under the relentless rain. The whimper came once more, and this time, Aiden pinpointed its source, a narrow alleyway just a few steps ahead. The darkness within was nearly impenetrable, the feeble glow of a nearby street lamp barely reaching its entrance. Hesitation gripped him for a moment. Alleyways like this were the kind of place his mother had always warned him to avoid. Yet something compelled him forward. He stepped cautiously into the alley, the soles of his sneakers splashing through shallow puddles. The air here was colder, carrying the faint, acrid smell of decay. Aiden squinted into the shadows, his senses on high alert. The noise of the rain seemed louder here, the alley amplifying every droplet as it struck the ground and walls. Then he saw it. Nestled between a rusted trash can and a crumbling brick wall was a small, shivering figure. At first, it was barely distinguishable from the piles of discarded debris that surrounded it. But as Aiden moved closer, the shape became clearer. A tiny, frail puppy, huddled against the wall as if trying to disappear into the bricks. The sight hit Aiden like a punch to the gut. The puppy was utterly soaked, its matted fur clinging to its emaciated frame. Every rib was visible, each one outlined sharply against its skin. Its body trembled violently, both from the cold and what Aiden could only assume was fear. The creature's eyes were wide, impossibly large for its small face, and filled with a haunting mix of terror and pleading. They seemed to look right through him, as though they carried the weight of every hardship the little animal had endured. For a moment, Aiden simply stared, his heart pounding in his chest. The world around him seemed to fade away, the rain, the cold, the darkness, all of it receding into the background. All he could see was the tiny, vulnerable life before him. The puppy let out another whimper, its head lifting weakly as if trying to appeal to him. Then, as it shifted its weight, its legs gave out beneath it, and it collapsed back onto the wet ground with a pitiful whine. Aiden's instincts took over. Without a second thought, he dropped to his knees, ignoring the icy water that soaked through his jeans. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured, his voice soft and steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "It's okay. You're safe now." The puppy flinched at the sound of his voice, its entire body going rigid. Aiden paused, his hands hovering midair. He could see the panic in the little creature's eyes, the way it tensed as if bracing for pain. The thought made his throat tighten. How long had it been since someone had shown this tiny soul kindness? What kind of life had it lived to make it so fearful? Slowly, deliberately, Aiden extended his hand, palm up, and held it still just inches away from the puppy. "It's okay," he said again, his tone as gentle as he could make it. "I'm not going to hurt you." The puppy hesitated, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. For a long moment, neither of them moved, both locked in a fragile moment of trust. Then, cautiously, the puppy leaned forward and sniffed Aiden's hand. The touch was fleeting, tentative, but it was enough. The puppy let out a shuddering breath and took a small, trembling step forward. Aiden's heart swelled with relief and something else he couldn't quite name. Carefully, he reached out and scooped the tiny creature into his arms. It weighed almost nothing, its body as light as a feather. Yet, as he cradled it against his chest, Aiden could feel the rapid, erratic flutter of its heartbeat against his own. The puppy's fur was cold and slick against his hands, and he could feel every ridge of its spine beneath his fingers. "You're coming home with me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The puppy didn't resist. It simply pressed its wet, shivering body closer to him, burying its face into the warmth of his jacket. Aiden held it tightly, shielding it from the rain as he stood, his arms wrapped protectively around the little creature as if the act alone could keep it safe from the harshness of the world. As Aiden stepped out of the alley and back into the rain, something inside him shifted. The heaviness that had been pressing against his chest all night seemed to lift, replaced by a fierce, unyielding determination. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. Neither of them would face the storm alone ever again. When Aiden brought Max home that stormy night, the apartment felt warmer somehow, even as he fumbled with the lock and kicked off his soaked shoes. The tiny puppy in his arms barely stirred. Max had surrendered to exhaustion, his little body limp against Aiden's chest. The quiet rise and fall of the puppy's labored breaths filled the silence of the room. Aiden moved quickly, grabbing an old towel from the bathroom. He carefully set Max down on the couch, his heart twisting at the sight of the frail creature curled up in a trembling ball. The towel was soft, worn from years of use, and Aiden wrapped it gently around Max, blotting the rainwater from his matted fur. "There you go, buddy," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "Let's get you warm." The puppy stirred slightly, his big eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. He let out a small sigh, the sound both weary and content, as if already sensing the safety of his new environment. Aiden felt a strange sense of purpose as he tended to Max. His hands moved with care, smoothing the towel over the puppy's fur, ensuring no part of him stayed wet or cold. It wasn't just about saving an animal, it was about saving this animal. Max wasn't just another stray. He was someone, a little life that had been cast aside and left to fend for itself. The thought filled Aiden with equal parts sadness and determination. Over the next few hours, Aiden became a man on a mission. He rummaged through his kitchen cupboards, searching for anything he could use to feed Max. He eventually settled on a bowl of shredded boiled chicken, plain and safe for the puppy's delicate stomach. Aiden set the bowl on the floor near the couch, coaxing Max to eat. "Come on, buddy," he encouraged, his tone light and hopeful. "This will help you feel better." Max sniffed the food hesitantly, his nose twitching as he considered it. Aiden held his breath, watching intently. It was a small victory when Max took a tentative lick, then another before finally nibbling at the chicken. Aiden let out a quiet sigh of relief, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's my boy," he said softly. The first few nights were the hardest. Max whimpered in his sleep, his tiny body twitching as if caught in a nightmare. Aiden stayed up with him, his own exhaustion forgotten as he sat by the couch, whispering comforting words and resting a hand gently on Max's side. He didn't know what horrors the little puppy had seen, but he knew he would do everything in his power to replace those memories with new ones. Good ones. The days passed in a blur of small, hard-fought victories. Max began to eat more, his appetite returning little by little. The once pronounced ridges of his ribs softened as he gained strength. Aiden took him to the vet, listening intently as the doctor outlined a plan to nurse Max back to health. The list of medications, special food, and care instructions was daunting, but Aiden didn't hesitate. This was his responsibility now, and he embraced it with an intensity that surprised even himself. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Max had moments of fear that broke Aiden's heart. He flinched at sudden movements, his small body tensing as if expecting a blow. Loud noises, like the slam of a door or the clatter of a dropped plate, sent him scurrying under the couch, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. Aiden learned to move more slowly, to speak more softly. He created a quiet, calm environment where Max could feel safe. And then, one day, something magical happened. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where time seemed to stretch endlessly. Aiden was sitting on the floor, absent-mindedly rolling a small rubber ball between his hands. Max lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, watching Aiden with a curious but cautious gaze. Without really thinking, Aiden rolled the ball across the floor. It bumped against the leg of the coffee table, coming to a gentle stop. He didn't expect anything. Max had never shown interest in toys before, and Aiden had long since resigned himself to the fact that play might be a foreign concept to the little dog. But to his astonishment, Max's ears perked up. He lifted his head, his nose twitching as he eyed the ball. Aiden held his breath, his heart pounding as he watched Max hesitate, then push himself to his feet. With a tentative step, then another, Max approached the ball. He sniffed it, nudged it with his nose, and then, with a sudden burst of energy, he pounced on it. Aiden laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the room. It was the first time he had seen Max truly engage with the world, the first time he had seen a spark of joy in the little dog's eyes. "That's my boy," Aiden exclaimed, his grin wide and unrestrained. Max picked up the ball in his mouth and turned to Aiden, his tail wagging for the first time. It was a small wag, hesitant and shaky, but it was there, a symbol of trust, of progress, of hope. From that moment on, Max began to bloom. He followed Aiden everywhere, his little paws pattering on the hardwood floor as he trailed his new best friend. Morning jogs became a shared ritual, with Max trotting faithfully at Aiden's side. Lazy afternoons were spent at the park, where Max discovered the joy of chasing butterflies and rolling in the grass. Even late-night study sessions found Max curled up beside Aiden, his head resting on Aiden's foot as if anchoring himself to his protector. Aiden often marveled at how much Max had changed. Not just physically, but emotionally. The once fragile, fearful puppy had transformed into a vibrant, loving companion. Max's eyes, which had once been filled with sorrow, now sparkled with curiosity and affection. He greeted each day with enthusiasm, his tail wagging furiously at the sight of Aiden. But perhaps the most incredible thing was the way Max seemed to understand Aiden on a level that went beyond words. On the days when Aiden felt overwhelmed or stressed, Max was always there, resting his head on Aiden's lap or nuzzling his hand. It was as if Max could sense his emotions, offering comfort and companionship without needing to be asked. Max wasn't just a pet. He was family. The days melted into a blur of warmth and companionship, the kind of bond that grows in unspoken ways, woven together by countless small moments. Aiden couldn't remember the last time his apartment had felt so alive. Max's presence wasn't just a comfort. It was transformative. The once quiet space now hummed with energy, filled with the rhythmic sound of paws against the floor, the occasional bark, and the soft jingling of Max's collar. Aiden woke every morning to the same routine. Max, bright-eyed and wagging his tail with uncontainable enthusiasm, jumping onto the edge of the bed to nudge him awake. All right, I'm up," Aiden would groan, feigning irritation as he ruffled Max's ears. Truthfully, though, he looked forward to those mornings. It was hard not to when the day began with such genuine excitement. Their adventures soon extended beyond the confines of the apartment. Aiden started taking Max to the park down the street, a sprawling green haven where sunlight filtered through the canopy of ancient trees. At first, Max was timid, sticking close to Aiden's side as they walked the gravel paths. But with each visit, his confidence grew. He began to explore, sniffing the grass and chasing after leaves that tumbled in the breeze. One afternoon, as Aiden sat on a bench under the shade of a tree, he watched Max frolic in the distance. The little dog had discovered a cluster of dandelions, and with playful curiosity, he pounced on the fluffy seeds, sending them scattering into the air like tiny parachutes. Aiden couldn't help but laugh, the sound carrying across the park. It was in moments like these that he realized how much Max had changed. Not just physically, but emotionally. The fragile, frightened puppy he had rescued from the rain was now a joyful, fearless companion. Max also had a knack for brightening even the most mundane parts of Aiden's life. Morning jogs became a shared ritual, with Max trotting faithfully at his side. On grocery runs, Max would sit patiently in the car, his nose pressed against the window as he watched Aiden unload the bags. Even late at night, when Aiden found himself buried in work, Max was there, curled up on the floor beside his desk, his steady breathing a soothing presence in the quiet hours. But it wasn't just the big moments or shared activities that defined their bond. It was the smaller, quieter gestures that spoke volumes. The way Max would rest his head on Aiden's lap whenever he sensed he was stressed. The way Aiden, without thinking, would save the last bite of his sandwich for Max, even though he knew the little dog had already eaten. There was an understanding between them, a kind of unspoken language that needed no words. One particularly memorable evening, Aiden found himself sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by a mess of papers and an empty coffee mug. Deadlines loomed, and stress had settled heavily on his shoulders. Max, as if sensing the tension, padded over to him and nudged his hand with his wet nose. "Not now, buddy," Aiden muttered, not looking up, but Max was nothing if not persistent. He placed his front paws on Aiden's knee and whined softly, his expressive eyes locking onto Aiden's face. Aiden sighed and set his pen down. "All right, what is it?" Max tilted his head, then bolted to the other side of the room, returning a moment later with his rubber ball. He dropped it at Aiden's feet and sat back, wagging his tail expectantly. Despite himself, Aiden smiled. "You're relentless. You know that?" He picked up the ball and tossed it lightly across the room. Max scrambled after it, his claws clicking against the floor. He returned moments later, his tail wagging so hard his entire body seemed to vibrate. For the next 15 minutes, the two of them played fetch, the stress that had weighed on Aiden's chest lifting with each throw. By the time Max finally flopped down on the floor, panting happily, Aiden felt lighter. He reached out and scratched behind Max's ears. "Thanks, buddy," he said softly. "I needed that." Max let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping against the floor. When Aiden closed the gate for the last time that day, a piece of his heart remained behind. He told himself it was the right thing, the only thing to do. Max deserved love and stability, and the elderly couple had promised to provide both. But as Aiden walked away, every step felt heavier than the last. The sound of rain had once been comforting, but now it echoed his sorrow, each drop carrying a whisper of the goodbye he never wanted to say. Aiden's flight overseas marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The bustling city where he now lived was a stark contrast to the quiet streets he had once roamed, with Max's towering skyscrapers loomed over him, their glass facades glinting in the sunlight, while a cacophony of voices and car horns filled the air. It should have been exciting. This was, after all, the opportunity he had always dreamed of, but something always felt missing. In the first few months, Aiden found himself constantly checking his phone, hoping for updates from the couple who had taken Max in. They sent him photos, Max basking in the sunlit backyard, chasing after a butterfly, or curled up on the porch in the warmth of an old blanket. Each image was a balm to Aiden's aching heart, but they also deepened the longing that never truly left him. Max, on the other hand, waited. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max would pad to the front gate and sit quietly. His ears perked up at the sound of every passing car, his tail wagging in hopeful anticipation. But as the headlights faded into the distance, his tail would droop, and he would lie down again, resting his head on his paws. The elderly couple watched this ritual with heavy hearts. They tried to distract him with toys and treats, but Max remained steadfast, his faith unwavering. The seasons came and went. The once vivid greens of the backyard turned to shades of gold and brown as autumn arrived, and then to white as winter blanketed the world in snow. Max's muzzle, once dark and glossy, began to turn gray. His youthful energy waned, and his movements grew slower, but one thing never changed: his nightly vigil at the gate. Meanwhile, Aiden's life continued to move forward. He adapted to his new environment, meeting new people and throwing himself into his work. He tried to fill the void with hobbies and social events, but nothing seemed to fit quite right. His apartment overseas was filled with modern conveniences, but it felt empty, soulless, even. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the absence of the soft patter of paws, the wagging tail that had once greeted him at the door, and the warm, steady presence of Max. On the loneliest nights, Aiden would sit by the window of his high-rise apartment, staring out at the glittering city lights. His thoughts would inevitably drift to Max. He wondered if Max still remembered him, if the little dog ever thought about their time together. Aiden's chest tightened at the thought of Max waiting by the gate, night after night, not understanding why he had been left behind. One rainy evening, years after their separation, Aiden sat down to write a letter to the couple. He thanked them for everything they had done for Max and asked for an update. A few weeks later, a reply arrived, along with a photo. The image showed Max sitting in the backyard, his gray muzzle illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. His eyes, though aged, still held the same soulful expression Aiden remembered. In the accompanying note, the couple wrote about Max's unwavering loyalty and his routine at the gate. They mentioned how he seemed to slow down in recent months, his joints stiff and his energy lower, but his spirit remained unbroken. Aiden stared at the photo for a long time, tears blurring his vision. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. The years had taken enough from them. Time, memories, moments they could never get back. It was time to go home. The sun was setting as Aiden's plane descended, casting the sky in shades of amber and violet. It had been years since he'd last walked the familiar streets of his hometown. Everything felt the same yet impossibly different, a paradox that tugged at his heart as he drove toward the house where Max now lived. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the winding roads. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of seeing Max again. When he finally arrived, the old gate stood before him, rusted and slightly askew from years of weathering storms. Aiden parked the car and sat for a moment, his heart pounding. The house looked much like he remembered from the photos the elderly couple had sent. A cozy bungalow with flower beds lining the front yard. But Aiden's eyes were fixed on the gate, the place where Max had waited, day after day, year after year. Aiden stepped out of the car, his legs trembling beneath him. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he approached the gate, each step heavier than the last. The sound of his footfalls on the gravel seemed deafening in the stillness of the evening. And then he saw him. At first, it was just a shadow, a gray-muzzled figure lying on the porch. Max's head rested on his paws, his ears twitching at the faint sound of movement. Slowly, he lifted his head, his tired eyes scanning the yard. The moment their gazes met, Aiden felt something inside him break and heal all at once. Max's eyes, though clouded with age, were unmistakable. They widened with recognition, a spark of life igniting within them. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a sudden burst of energy that defied his aging joints, Max scrambled to his feet. His tail wagged furiously, his entire body trembling with the sheer force of his excitement. Aiden dropped to his knees as Max bounded toward him, his gait uneven but determined. The years melted away in that instant. There was no distance, no separation, only the unbreakable bond that had tethered them together across time. Max, Aiden choked out, his voice thick with emotion. He opened his arms, and Max crashed into him, nearly knocking him over. Aiden buried his face in Max's fur, his tears soaking the old dog's coat. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry. I'm home." Max licked Aiden's face fervently, his tail a blur of motion. It was as if he was trying to say, "It's okay. You're here now." Despite his age, despite the years of waiting, Max's love for Aiden had remained unwavering. His eyes shone with a mix of joy and relief, and Aiden could feel the warmth of his heartbeat against his chest. The elderly couple watched from the porch, tears glistening in their eyes. They had grown attached to Max over the years, but they had always known that his heart belonged to Aiden. "He never gave up on you," the woman said softly as Aiden approached them with Max by his side. "Not for a single day." Aiden nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve him." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aiden and Max sat together in the backyard, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Max lay with his head on Aiden's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Aiden stroked his fur gently, his fingers tracing the gray streaks that had replaced the puppy's once dark coat. "I missed you," Aiden said, his voice breaking. "Every single day. I never stopped thinking about you." Max wagged his tail lazily, a soft thump against the grass. Aiden knew their time together now was borrowed. Max was older, slower, and his body carried the weight of the years they had spent apart. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had found their way back to each other, and that was enough. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Aiden whispered a promise. "I'll never leave you again." Max let out a contented sigh, his breathing steady and calm. For the first time in years, both of them felt whole. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories about animals and their deep connections with humans.